workshop sessions, come on up here and join us on the podium. That'll make it a little bit easier to go through things. Thanks. Let's see, we've got people from A. We're A. Somebody up here from Workshop B? Yeah, that's me. Okay. And C and D, we got everybody here? Okay, so now we need Ian. Anybody seen Ian? There he is. Okay. So while Ian makes his way up here, and we'll go through what we've taken away from today, just a couple of quick thanks. I want to thank all of our sponsors for helping to make this possible. As well as, in particular, the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund for sponsoring videotaping all of this, or at least our plenary sessions. We've had a lot of great participation on the steering committee and planning committee for this. Whoever's involved in the room here involved with those committees, will you mind just standing up? I'd like to recognize your input. Yeah, that's you too, Pat. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, this day could not have gone off without our staff at Sustainable Energy Advantage, and particularly my office assistant and person who makes my life function, Catherine Craddock. Without her attention to every detail here, well, let me put it this way. Everything that went right today, she gets credit for. Anything that didn't probably couldn't have been done. Thank you very much, Ken. So, Ian, you want to take it from here? You're going to MC our workshop rabble? Sure.
So before we get to closing, and thanks again for all of you who are sticking out to the bitter end to hear the report outs of the session, which actually I think is one of the most important aspects of this. The first part was a fair amount of talking at folks, and so these workshops were the opportunity for people to talk and try to come together on some of the issues. So without further ado, who would like to start? Or I will select one. Tick, tick. Come on, who wants to go first?
You go in alphabetical order.
I don't have the list, so. Sure. Go for it.
Do we just do it from here or up there?
Whichever you choose.
You're choosing for all of us. Do I? Actually, I'm going to go up here. I'm not quite sure. Where are our notes?
Notes. You were asked to answer these questions.
So just quickly, our group was looking at strategies to advance the state of knowledge, I think, around impacts and issues of concern. And we divided into three groups, two of whom are represented. Do we have the third? Not sure. Anyway, we were looking at the environmental dimensions and the human dimensions. So my group focused mostly on wildlife. And the questions that you can see up here, well, I'll just tell you what they were, but one was, what are the topics that we should be delving more into? And then the second one was, what are the strategies that are likely to be most effective in advancing the state of knowledge around those particular topics? And then what are the standards that we would want to have to make sure that the outcomes are credible? So I'm just going to talk briefly, and it really builds on the themes from the panel we heard this morning around, for example, bats and the fact that we don't have a good understanding of the baseline. So what do the populations look like, so that we can evaluate more whether a given impact, so if we do a survey, a study, and we find out that there are likely to be a certain number of bats or a certain species of bird killed, then we can make a decision as a community, as a group of stakeholders, about whether that's whether we believe that's significant enough to warrant stopping the project or mitigating in some other way. So that was one issue. The other one I'll mention is the interest in having a more comprehensive set of baseline surveys out there, so things that can serve as to sort of guide research for a particular project. And tying in with that, when we talked about the strategies and the standards, one thought that sort of bubbled up was having an approved set of protocols, or a peer-reviewed set of protocols for conducting the kind of surveys. So if we're going to do bird or bat impact studies, pre-construction and then post-construction, if we have an approved set of protocols, then what we can and they're correctly implemented by the project developers in conjunction with the community, then we can have data where we're not arguing over the technique, but we're arguing over the findings or trying to wrestle with those about whether they're significant or not. And the other piece of that, sorry, Ed, if you could just pull the second one out. The other piece of this was really trying to get stakeholder input on the design. So understanding that we have these approved, sort of pre-approved, peer-reviewed methodologies. If we have a process for what we're going to do with those, or try to get input, stakeholder input, a broad stakeholder input on what we're going to do with those, then we're likely to have, we're not necessarily going to have consensus on that, but at least people will have an opportunity to be heard in terms of what they think is important, what they think should be covered within those types of studies. And then when we get to the outcome, we won't necessarily agree on what they mean, but at least we'll have a common platform from which to have that discussion. Thank you.
There were some other pieces from A.
Other comments from A? Yeah, okay.
Yes. You want to
So the question we dealt with was, if industry is the only source of funding for research and education, how do we design and fund without tarnishing our credibility and neutrality and validity? So there's clearly a need for credible research, as we just heard and as we've heard all day. So we came up with a couple different thoughts. And one was source of funding, and what would the structure of such an organization be, and what kind of models could we look to maybe structure this whole effort. And the source might be, we talked about a broad base of funders. Again, this is all very general, but it's a start. Broad base of funders, maybe including foundations, some government involvement, industry because they have the money, donations, such as Clean Power Now, survives a lot on donations, but some broad base of funding to start this effort. And then the structure, we were thinking about the models might be something like the Great Lakes Wind Collaborative. So perhaps a regional model, but maybe even a Northeast Regional Wind Collaborative, something like that. Here's some other models that we thought of, which were American Wind and Wildlife Institute, or NYSERDA's research arm, academic models, NIH, some way to maintain neutrality and credibility. The structure, we were thinking the board might include, be a broad-based board that would include academics, community involvement, perhaps representatives from regional planning boards, some kind of community, very strong community involvement because of the slide that we saw earlier. Industry involvement, environmental NGOs, perhaps representatives from the federal research labs, as long as they still get funding and exist. And maybe then there would be subcommittees that would, with technical advisors, to oversee and evaluate all the different research areas that are being studied that John talked about earlier. And then I think that's about it. But the basic idea was that it would be a region-wide effort to address finally the need for standards and the need for good research figure out a way to fund it, figure out a way to make it credible, figure out a way to put it out there. And I would love to see that, and I would love to see that come out of this meeting. So we'll see where we can go with that.
So the last session for workshop A.
I'll see if I can do justice to this. All right, so the last group in Workshop A tackled the same questions overall that John Rogers mentioned to start, but focused on environmental impacts as well as talking about some technology issues. So one of the issues was concerns over the ability for, I'm not sure if it was quite efficiency of the technology or the ability for the technology to have a large-scale impact given its variability. So there was a lot of discussion of battery and storage technologies and paying attention to a lot of the research that's going on, and as well as stimulating some of the research going on to allow those to happen. The other areas that were discussed had to do with acoustic issues, flicker studies, and property values. So let's see. I think one of the key takeaways was having noise study requirements required in bylaws, ambient pre-construction and post-construction, paid for by the developer, consultant chose by the municipality. So I think that's probably the key takeaways on that one. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Bob. And since we started alphabetically, then let's go to workshop B.
Okay. So our session was using stakeholder networks to engage the undecided, and myself and my colleagues from CLF Ventures facilitated this. My name is Jasmine Tangway, by the way. So we kind of began with the premise that the ways that stakeholders are connected to one another has huge implications for the flow of information and influence in wind siting decisions. And so we talked about ways to kind of build effective linkages to reach those who are currently left out of wind siting conversations, and how to get information to this kind of undecided majority, which many people recognize as being kind of pivotal in the outcome of wind siting decisions. So we actually kind of drew quite a bit from the pre-conference survey question in order to kind of lay out some themes for our breakout groups. And you guys might remember that word cloud, the first one from this morning. That was the one for our session with these big, large font words like community and dialogue and field trips and that kind of thing. And that was generated from a question which asked people, how should project developers and public leaders engage the undecided majority that typically exist in early stages of wind siting projects? And so we got a whole host of wonderful suggestions, and we were able to kind of sift through those in advance and come up with 4 major categories or themes that we used in our workshop as breakout group topics. And so those 4 themes were, the first one was large group open dialogue. So a lot of people had the suggestion of large-scale open community meetings that bring people together to kind of engage with energy issues generally, or with the particulars of a particular siting proposal. The idea is that they would be open to expressions of opinion and discussion of information, but in a large format and open to a wide range of content for discussion. The second theme was small group or individual conversations. So one-on-one conversations, neighborhood organizations and other kind of targeted groups, one of the suggestions I really liked was making short, focused stops at pre-existing community groups meetings. So using existing networks as a vehicle for transferring information about a project and tapping into some of these kind of tightly knit networks that can be very effective in terms of kind of then digesting that information. The third theme was presentation of facts and information, either live or through the media. And that included everything from cable TV talk shows, mailings, kind of Wind 101 type educational briefings, and the NEWEEP project itself. So people really saw a need and had a lot of great ideas on this idea that we need to get facts and information out to these undecided folks. And then finally, trips and case studies. So let's bring people to actual operating wind projects and let them talk to neighbors and actually see and hear what's happening there. So those were the 4 themes that kind of were generated from the survey, and we used those in our breakout groups and asked the question, how do we actually want to implement this outreach to the undecided, and how can we use networks to do a better job with that? And we got some great ideas from the breakouts. We ended up collapsing the 3rd and 4th theme into one group, so we had 3 groups in our workshop. The large group had an idea of getting opponents and proponents together to develop the education process. So they would agree on what to study and what would be acceptable or not. So some of you are familiar with the term joint fact-finding. A lot of effort on process and making sure that the questions we're asking and the way in which we're answering them has broad support so that scientific information isn't then contested later. In terms of the small group meetings, people suggested that you should start with a group that you might suspect is pro-wind or on your side, but then find an opponent for a dialogue to begin to understand the issues and begin to respond to concerns, and use the opponent as a bridge to get in with other opponents. So again, using these ties within networks to expand your reach if you are a wind proponent, and get access, not just access, but to earn trust by using established connections, and therefore kind of maybe getting someone's ear who you might not otherwise. And then finally, the fact sharing and trips group, we call them. Those were the folks who were focused on the kind of direct experience of visiting wind farms and also the educational component. They suggested using educators all the way from elementary school to college level, adding wind issues to the curriculum and including site visits, involving business leaders like the Chamber of Commerce and making a compelling economic argument there. And then finally, making use of town energy committees, which tend to embody a lot of enthusiasm and insight and often expertise, and making those folks kind of the de facto champions to lead special events and tie the local action to national and global events. So I think we got a lot of great ideas and very implementation-oriented ideas. So I think it was a great conversation. And we also worked on building the network within the room. So we're going to kind of try to match up folks who had questions and with folks who had expertise on specific issues. And if you'd like to get in on that, let me know and we can include you. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So the third workshop C was really looking at building better bylaws and better dialogue at a community scale.
Okay, yes, great. So we talked about building better wind turbine bylaws or ordinances based on the premise that if you do more effective, more scientifically rigorous work up front, you can avoid some of the unpleasant trees when projects actually get proposed and come in front of planning boards. We had a lot of smart people in the room with some very relevant experience, and I thought we had a very productive discussion. We started out by identifying issues that should be regulated. Why, in fact, you're regulating wind turbines. Just a quick rundown. The big one was noise, obviously. We talked about flicker, visual impact, wildlife safety. We talked about noise not just in the standard definition, but that provided by DEP, but the amplitude modulation, which we've heard about some today, and the fact that perhaps there's more effective ways to identify the effect noise is having on abutters, and more effective ways after you identify that to regulate it. We also identified public good, and that obviously came up earlier in the discussion today without being defined. And we spent some time thinking about whether that's the kind of thing you even want to include in a land use bylaw. We didn't reach consensus on that, but there was good thoughts on both sides for putting it out there. Why you're drafting the bylaw, whether it be financial benefit to the town or the broader environmental benefit. That also led to a very interesting discussion about capacity factors. I've seen in Plymouth, and some of our attendees I saw in Plymouth, the requirement, I think it was 25% capacity factor for any project that's proposed, and whether that's a reasonable thing to require in a privately funded project. Again, no consensus, but an interesting discussion. We moved there from discussion of what the issues are to the actual tools that we would use to regulate. And we hit the usual suspects, mitigation, zoning, and then we talked about setbacks. And I thought this was the most interesting part of the discussion for me personally, because you see so many towns, and in fact recently we saw the Cape Cod Commission use setbacks, I think, to try to address a lot of the concerns that are out there, whether it be noise or flicker. And what I heard from our workshop was that that's really a misuse of setbacks. I heard that if you're talking about flicker, there are ways you can model and regulate flicker. And if you're talking about noise, there's ways you can model and regulate noise. Using a setback as a proxy to kind of allay concerns about those things is both ineffective and ultimately unproductive. With the important caveat that, of course, you need a setback for safety, fall zone safety issues. But what I really heard very strongly from my workshop was that we should pay attention to regulating these concerns in more effective, precise ways, and perhaps not rely on a setback. So interesting and productive, and lots of work to be done.
And last but not least, learning from experience. So using planning and mitigation to find better outcomes for projects as they go forward.
Okay, this is where we figured it all out, so we can tell you what the ways to do it. Peter McPhee and Liz Argo helped me to moderate and take notes during this session, so thanks to them. We broke our session down actually into 4 different groups. One focused on property values, another on aesthetics, and we had 2 groups actually sit down and talk about sound impacts. From the first 2 groups of property values and aesthetics, I think we really heard a theme of trade-offs and valuation, which is something that we've sort of heard throughout the day, and we certainly heard in these 2 contexts. And we basically asked people to talk about areas of interest or concern, but also to try to identify needs and areas of research or resources that should be created to help address those concerns and needs. So on the property value piece, what we heard from that group was that in terms of research, they were really interested in hearing more how the data that's out there can better address the situations that we're seeing here in New England, where we're having turbines that are closer and projects overall that are smaller than what it seems like some of the other data that's been collected may suggest. Also interested in there's a lot of talk about, we sort of boiled down to comparative valuation. So how do you compare both different siting choices and different facilities that have been already erected? So how does a wind turbine project compare to a water treatment plant that the municipality might have built? There was also discussion around those choices about social equity and the idea of going into maybe lower income areas to develop projects and how that was going to play out in terms of property values. And then I think what was interesting was the discussion about how to quantify impacts. And I think what that group articulated was the concern that what some people might talk about, is their personal belief. They don't want to look at these turbines. They think they're unsightly, or they like to look at them. That's a difficult thing to measure and put a value on it. So if we're talking about any sort of compensation for property value impact, can we base it on something that's more easily measurable, like decibel levels at a certain point, or setbacks, or distance from the turbine, basically. So basically just questions around methodology of how to quantify those impacts. The aesthetics group talked a lot about how to eliminate the unknown, and how do we know what this is really going to look like and how it's going to affect us on a day-to-day basis. And what that group chose to talk about was sort of to emphasize the value of existing resources that are already out there, such as visual simulation tools and animation tools, and the fact that there's already been some discussion on valuation of scenic resources on the state agency level. And although there's the challenge of sort of dealing with property by property impact or preference, that the state has already identified areas of value. And so they talked about the importance of using those existing resources and efforts to date to use them throughout the engagement process and make communities aware of the fact that these tools are available, and discussions have taken place. The sound groups, I'll try to, I might put them together in a few ways, but I think there was sort of a focus on both planning in advance as well as resources that could be available and would be helpful to communities and folks looking at wind power. From the first group, we heard a lot about this planning piece and how developers should consider building in costs in advance into their project. Those costs might be used to do things like caulking and insulation and getting air conditioners for people if they find the sound bothersome. And that the cost could also be connected to contingency plans, which is something that came up in the second group, which was saying that, before a project is permitted, there should be plans in place if the impacts are greater than what was originally anticipated. And that it's important that if you're doing that planning in advance, to be able to communicate that to the potentially impacted landowners and the community as a whole, that these steps are taking place and the planning is occurring. There was discussion on low frequency and infrasound, and some folks in the group felt that the state should do a better job to consider that in their regulations, and that manufacturers should also be considering those two pieces, and that hopefully that would drive them to develop quieter turbines. And then there was a discussion about the importance of agreement on measurement, particularly of ambient sound, and that there are a lot of decisions that need to be made across the board from state to state about when you measure it, how you deal with topography and terrain, and that this group sort of stressed, I think what I heard was the importance of agreeing on that methodology and choices in advance, so that you are using, in both your pre- and post-construction monitoring, you're using agreed upon methodologies. Just a couple of other pieces from the other sound group that I think really did a great job of emphasizing some resources they felt would be useful. One was interest in having some guidance on various types of turbines, and this idea that some folks feel that different turbines could potentially be louder than others, and how can a community really understand if they're getting the quietest turbine out there. There was also interest in getting some guidance on the different terrain types and how that's going to impact sound propagation, and that, in New England we have forested areas, we have hilly areas, we have suburban and urban areas, and sort of how do those different types of land impact sound propagation. And then there was discussion about existing regulations and how there was, folks felt a need to both clarify and reevaluate existing state regulations and talk about, how do you, when do you take ambient sound measurements in pre-construction? Folks felt that should be taking place at night or the quietest time. The questions about, are these regulations actually sufficient and able to address what some folks think are specific characteristics that are specific to noise, and should we be looking to Europe and their setbacks of 1 to 1.5 miles and putting those in our regulations? The group emphasized the need for transparency and discussed sort of raising some questions about when does a developer go quote unquote public. This concern that some landowners might know quite a bit for a year or two and the rest of the community doesn't find out until afterwards. And then also just questions about the data that has been acquired or developed from a developer, bird impacts or whatnot, and folks feeling like that data wasn't accessible to the public. The last point from that group was basically a point about efficiency and that we should be doing more to talk about using less energy. But all in all, I think we had a great conversation. There was a wide variety of perspectives in the room, and I think everybody did a good job of getting all of these issues out there, and hopefully some of us in the room can run with those.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure how Bob does this, but that ended exactly at 5:30. Yeah. So first, thank you to everybody has clapped already, but certainly thank you to these people. It certainly takes a lot to be able to sum up very quickly and under pressure the views from a very wide group of people and pull them into a few short words. So thank you again for everybody up here who went ahead and did this. In the guise of thanks, also definitely want to take the advantage of this opportunity to thank Bob and Sustainable Energy Advantage for really pulling this together. Social acceptance is a very important issue, especially in the New England context. And having an organization like NEWEEP who has been willing to grab this issue and think about it 3 years ago when the request for proposals from the Department of Energy came out about how do we address challenges to deploying more wind technologies, having this organization decide that this was an issue that they felt needed to be addressed for everybody's good. So that there weren't people in communities who felt like they were getting steamrolled, and there weren't people who were trying to do good projects who weren't getting them done. And so I do want to commend Bob and his team for pulling the concept together and then doing my own perception, and everybody will have their own, but my own perception of what has been a very valiant effort to maintain the middle road in producing not only this workshop but the webinar series and really trying to address the issues. So I do want to thank Bob and his staff for doing that. I think it's critical. So in a few minutes, to sum up, understanding that everybody does want to go home tonight, and a lot of you have come a long way. I think a lot of key points were brought up today, which is fabulous, and a lot of nice discussion was happened, and I hope people are walking out the door feeling better about where we stand in this path that we're all undertaking. But some key points. Certainly the need to move forwards with alternatives to the current power mix, I think, is a clear one that was expressed a number of times today, and certainly during the keynote. And that wind is one of those very viable alternatives, and both from a cost and a development standpoint. Wind is part of that. But a very clear understanding that everybody understands and realizes that wind has very real impacts, and to broad brush those impacts does a disservice not only to the people who are impacted, but also to the industry and the overall goal of leaving a better planet for our children. And so I think those are very key points that we need to keep track of. Other things, clear and honest debate, understanding that different people are impacted differently. And we need to understand that. And so only through clear and honest debate like we've had today are we able to make projects go forwards. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be pleased. Everybody is not going to be pleased. We know that. And the question is, how do we develop projects where they make sense in ways that we mitigate the most harsh impacts to the point where they are acceptable by the communities where these projects are still going in and still allow them to go in. Part of this is active listening. And so listening to what people say and then being able to ingest that, understand where they're coming from, and then being able to work communally to address those issues. I think all of those were my key kind of take-home points from today, just as a quick sum up. So I think this meeting was a very good, nice step forwards, a good civil dialogue, but it's a step forwards on a road that we're all going to take, and we're going to have to take over the next number of years, probably for the rest of our lifetimes. So again, hopefully we'll be able to do more of these types of activities. Each of you should have received on your in front of you, and if you didn't grab one in the back of the room, but it's a survey sheet that describes your views about this event, because it's critical. Certainly I think if you're here, that probably means you're finding it of value. This probably would have been better handed out at the beginning so that everybody who left right after lunch could have told us whether it was of value to them. But one of the key points here is at the bottom. And this activity was largely funded not only by the sponsors that we see, but from the U.S. Department of Energy. And as we know from the current discussions in Congress, the federal government is not necessarily likely to be funding a lot of these events going forwards. We just can't afford it under our current climate. And so the question is, how do we continue this dialogue going forwards? And so that's a challenge I put out to you as an organization about how we do keep a dialogue going forwards. And as we heard from some of the sessions today, how do we keep that dialogue in this kind of fair and honest way that we've been talking about here, in the potential absence of federal funding, and then in a large cases state funding as well. All of that is getting harder to do. And so if you have ideas or thoughts or would like to help, please take a few moments and fill out the bottom of this survey to let people know what you're thinking. Lastly, before I turn it over to Bob for the few closing remarks, I again want to thank you for participating. This is a community process, and you are the community. So without you, none of this would be happening. And that goes for both the people that are the proponents of wind projects, but also the opponents of wind projects, because your voices are critical in making sure that we do what we do. And I think the wind industry likes to hold itself up as being better stewards of communities and the environment than some of the other technologies that are out there. And the only way that happens is if people who are impacted in the communities hold feet to the fire and make sure that we don't belay that trust. So again, thank you all for being here and for taking the time to take part in this engagement. Bob.
Thanks, Ian. Let's see, we've been doing some thanking here. Again, I want to thank DOE for our grant funding and again, our sponsors for their help. We've had a number of volunteers that have helped make things go smoothly today, keeping the trains running on time, getting everything where it needed to be, and I want to extend a grateful thanks to them as well. To our many speakers, I think we had an excellent contribution from across the spectrum today, and I appreciate their willingness to contribute their time, as well as the moderators, the panelists, and Ian. We started this process together with Ian's predecessor at Wind Power America, Larry Flowers, who's since retired and gone on to a different role. switching over to working with Ian. Both very impressive individuals with very different styles. I've really enjoyed and appreciated Ian's commitment, while Ian has a national role, to putting a lot of time into what we've been trying to do here. So that's been a great help. I thought I'd share a couple of quick statistics with you. You've been in these rooms together all day. I thought it might be useful to you to understand who you all are, who's been sitting next to you. Did a little, got up this morning a little bit early and took a look at our 249 registrants before walk-ins today. And we had, of those, 69 people that were for government or town planning boards, basically the policy and setting decision makers. We had 53 people from what I'll consider service firms, those that are providing the research, doing the studies, doing the consulting for both industry and opponents and communities to help inform the dialogues. 32 people from non-government organizations from across the spectrum. 28 people, which I'll categorized as the public, those that didn't have other affiliation. 16 people from law firms. 16 people from either wind developers, manufacturers, or investors. 12 people who fall into the category of educators, and another 12 research institutions. 4 from utilities. 3 from what I would consider project hosts. ISO New England, 1 mediator, 1 student, and 1 union. So I thought that was a really interesting cross-section of the people involved here. The one group that I was hoping to get here and that we didn't was members of the press, because I think the press has really done, with some exceptions, a spotty and sometimes poor job of communicating the variety of perspectives that we've all heard today. So maybe that's something we can work on communicating more broadly. The materials from this event will be made available online, both the PowerPoints, the video, and we've tried to do audio taping, audio recording of some of the other sessions. I don't know how well that's going to come out, but if it's usable, we'll make that available as well. We'll send an email out to all the attendees to let you know when it's up and posted. I think it may take a couple of weeks to get it all together and up there. We will also, maybe at the same time, do a quick follow-up survey to just get your feedback. What did we do well? What can we do better? Where do we go from here? We'll make it short. We appreciate your attention, your bandwidth. I was very happy that registrants took the time to fill out a pre-conference survey that really helped us make the workshops useful. And finally, I've been really impressed with you, all of the participants in this process today. I will admit that I was very apprehensive about how this would all come off. As many of you, most of you have seen, public dialogues about wind siting can get nasty. While I was hopeful that we'd be able to have a conversation where we toned it down, until it happened, I didn't know what it would be like. And the dialogue today has really surpassed my expectations, and you all have each other to thank for that. I hope you got a lot out of it. I thank you for your time making the trip here today, and I hope we can move this forward and find some better outcomes. Thank you. I guess that's it. Thanks.